Welcome to the CEO Shift Show. This show is for service-based CEOs who are good at what they do, but they're tired of feeling like the business only really works when they're carrying it. Before we go any further, if something in this episode resonates, share it and leave a comment. Not for the algorithm, but because there's another CEO listening right now who thinks this pressure, I think it's just part of the job. Today's conversation matters because we're not talking about hustle. We're not talking about motivation. And we're definitely not talking about setting better goals. We're talking about why so many capable, disciplined, thoughtful CEOs have clear vision and still feel like nothing sticks. And let's be really clear, before we can go any further, most of you do not have a vision problem. What the problem is the translation of that vision. Vision lives in the future and your business lives inside of it. And when there's nothing intentionally connecting those two, the urgency, it takes over and it wins every single time. So we need to look at slowing this down and let's spend some time unpacking this. Here's what I see over and over again. And I want to slow this down because it's subtle. A CEO, they set a vision. They set revenue targets, capacity goals, which is going to equal more freedom and more space. On paper, it makes complete sense. It's logical. It's very often well thought out. But here's what doesn't get talked about enough. Vision, abstract by nature, and it lives in intention, and it actually lives in the future. But your business doesn't. Your business lives in the present. It lives inside a week, and it lives inside decisions that don't feel strategic, but absolutely are. So you show up on Monday, the client needs answers, teams need directions, schedules shift, details start to pile up. None of those moments announce themselves as, hey, if you're not careful, this is where your vision breaks. Everything just shows up and feels urgent. So the CEO steps in again, clarifies again, decides again, and everybody adjusts. And it's not because there's a control issue, and it's not because they don't trust their people, but because in that moment, they're the only place where all of the information actually connects. This is the gap that most CEOs miss. When the vision isn't translated into the weekly operating structure, the CEO now becomes the translation layer. You become the bridge between the future and the present, and whatever strategy and execution goes with that. And at first, that probably actually feels like leadership. You're needed, you're being helpful. Things move because you're there. And I'm sure that feels really good. But if you stay in that position too long, something quietly starts to happen. The business doesn't learn how now to start to move on its own. It learns how to wait for you. And that's the shift most CEOs don't see in real time. Because nothing is breaking, nothing is on fire. But the moment you step away, everything then starts to slow down. Everything pauses, everything hesitates. And it's not because your people are incapable, but it's because the system still depends on you to translate what matters. And that's where your fragility actually lives. And so this is where people start to get stuck. They lean into thinking that the answer is more about discipline. It's more about better, stronger focus. It's about stronger boundaries. But those are personal solutions. And what you're having here is actually structural problems. You can be the most disciplined CEO in the world, and you can still be the bottleneck, because discipline doesn't replace structure. Structure is what allows your vision to now land, repeat, and survive the real life tests. So let me ground this into something real. So this comes from a coaching conversation with a service-based CEO. And let's be really clear on why I'm sharing this. It's not a testimonial. It's not a success story, but it's evidence. Because moments like this tell you exactly how a business is actually operating. In this example, nothing dramatic happened, no blow up, no crisis. He took a short step away from family, stayed mostly unplugged. And that part matters, because when someone says, I was gone and everything fell apart, well, that's obvious. That's not what happened. My client came back and things were technically fine. Work was moving, employees were busy, clients were being well served. And yet, within hours, he felt it. That familiar pressure, that subtle pull. And then he said, I feel like I have to be in 3 places at once. So let's just pause there. That sentence, it's not about workload. It's not even about time. It's about where the business is still relying on the CEO to actually help make sense of things. While he was away, the business, it didn't break, but it didn't fully move either. It waited. It waited for him to come back so that decisions could be clarified. So priorities could now be aligned and adjustments could be made. The team wasn't failing. No one dropped any balls. And that's why this is such an important example. Because when nothing explodes, when everything pauses, it tells you the truth. It tells you the CEO is still acting as the central processor. This isn't by choice. It's not by ego, but because the system still has yet to be built to carry clarity without the CEO involved. That's the evidence. This is where most conversations rush, because once you see the pattern, the temptation is to now jump right in and try to fix it. But before we talk about what was missing, we need to talk about why this keeps repeating, even for good leaders. Nothing was wrong in the obvious sense. We had the meetings, we had the planning, the people were doing their jobs. But one thing stayed consistent. The information still flowed through the CEO. Decisions still landed with the CEO. And adjustments still waited for the CEO. Not because anybody demanded it, not because the CEO continues to insist on control, but because the business didn't yet have a way to translate the vision into week-to-week reality without him. And this is where many CEOs get tripped up. Stepping in feels like leadership. Clarifying feels helpful. And staying close feels responsible, especially when the work is complex. There's a quieter truth at play here. Every time you step in to that translation, The system never has to learn how to do it for itself. So the business keeps functioning, but it stays dependent. That's why the pressure never fully lifts. You're not exhausted because you're doing too much. You're exhausted because you're acting as the connective tissue for absolutely everything in your business. Let's be clear, we weren't missing another meeting. We didn't need more effort. Everybody had the best of intentions. What was missing was a weekly operating rhythm. That rhythm that could carry the clarity forward without relying on the CEO as the translator. So weekly rhythms matter because this is where our vision meets our reality. This is where priorities get named before they become urgent, where decisions move earlier and where ownership becomes visible. So instead of fixing 10 things, we choose one, not a tool, not a hack. We choose a weekly team alignment rhythm, fully owned, here's the key, by somebody else. Not eventually, not when things calm down, but now. Now, this is where people expect a checklist, and I'm not going to give you one because what actually made this work wasn't the mechanics. It was where the work moved. Yes, the CEO blocked 90 minutes once a week. Unavailable, phone off, no reacting. That's not the point. The point is what stopped happening during the rest of the week. Before this shift, decisions landed in real time. They landed in mid-conversation. They landed in mid-problem. They landed in mid-emotion. And that's exhausting. Once the weekly rhythm was installed, decisions, we were able to move them earlier. Doesn't mean that everything went perfect, especially not all at once, but early enough to change the feel of the week. The 90 minutes wasn't spent doing work. It was spent deciding what needed to be clear before Monday. Not to run it or to rescue it, but to actually be able to sit there and listen. Because listening without jumping in is how you see where the system is still thin. Those weeks were uncomfortable, but slowly the meeting started to carry itself. Questions started going to the right person. Decisions stopped routing back automatically. And so now what we're seeing is the real installation. Not the meeting, not the agenda, but the transfer of translation. What the CEO got back wasn't just time, it was space to think. And that is what made everything else possible. Most CEOs don't necessarily resist structure. They resist what structure forces them to now face. Slowing down doesn't feel neutral. It feels risky. When there's momentum, people are relying on you. Things are moving. And underneath, that's a quiet fear. The fear is that if I step back, something will fall. Will a mistake surface? Will I regret not being closer? So you stay available, you stay reachable, and you stay just close enough. And that feels responsible. But here's the truth, most CEOs, they won't say out loud. What you're protecting isn't the business, it's the discomfort of watching someone else carry something imperfectly. Because when you step back, you don't just free up time, you give up being the safety net. And that can feel like you're letting go of importance. But if the business can't tolerate you stepping back, it's just not resilient. And contrary to popular belief, resilience doesn't come from effort. It comes from ownership that actually lives outside of you. Your business does not need more of your energy. It needs fewer places where everything still depends on you. If you've stayed with me this far, you already know this isn't about motivation. It's about honesty. So here's the real CEO question. Where is your business still waiting for you to make sense of things? Not where you're busy, not where you're overwhelmed, where you're still acting as translator. I want you to notice one place this week where a weekly rhythm still collapses without you. And this is where your opportunity for leverage is hiding. It gives you the opportunity to ask yourself, what information are you still carrying? What decisions keep landing back on you? And where have you confused being helpful with being necessary? That's the work. And if you want support doing this, there are a few paths. If you want clarity first, start inside the growth engine. If you're ready for structure, the tool vault is there. And if you know you're done being the translation layer, one-to-one coaching or done-for-you support is going to be your next best step. All the links are below. Your vision doesn't need more pressure. It needs a structure that can carry it, even when you step back. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you next week on the CEO Shift Show.